One of the central themes of this week's Parashat Devarim, is the story of Chet Hameraglim, the sin of the spies. The Talmud in a number of places recounts that the primary issue of the spies was that they spoke ill of the land of Israel. They spoke lashon hara. Indeed, for instance, the Gemara in Erchin and Daf Tedvav says as follows: "Bo'urei kama gadol koach shel lashon hara." Come and see how bad is lashon hara. Minalad mimeraglim. We see and learn from the meraglim how bad lashon hara is. Uma motzi shemra al etzim v'avanim kach, hamotzi shemra al chaver al achat kama v'kama. What someone who gossips, who spreads falsities about stones and wood, has this punishment of the meraglim. So much worse so is clearly someone who speaks ill about an individual, an actual person. When we talk about and categorize the exact sin of the meraglim, we speak about there are different types of lashon hara. The Rambam, in defining lashon hara in Hilchot Deot, speaks about 3 or 4 different types of lashon hara, and it's rather clear that the form of lashon hara that the meraglim participated in is what's called motzi shemra, type of what we call defamation, or spreading false rumors. Indeed, it's rather difficult to say that the problem of the meraglim was anything else, because the other types of issues or forms of lashon hara, things like rechilut, are primarily issues of gossiping or tittle-tattling, things that involve one superfluously going to another individual and sharing gossip. But that's not really what happens in the story of the spies, because the whole point is they are meant to report. That's what their job is. The problem here is not that they are reporting things or sharing unnecessarily. The problem is that what they're sharing, the content, is problematic. That's the typical way of understanding the sin, and indeed that's the way the Gemara in Erchin describes it as motzi shemra. What's fascinating is that Rabbi Gershom's commentary on that very same Gemara, he cites 2 verses as examples of this motzi shemra. Number 1, Eretz ochelet yoshevehahi. The meraglim recounted that the land of Israel is a land that eats its inhabitants, certainly something which isn't true, both literally and metaphorically. As well as, and here's the real puncher, he says, Arim gidolot ufzerot b'shamayim. Citing a verse from this week's Parsha, the spies describe the land of Israel as a land that has large cities that are fortified with walls up to the heaven. Now, why is that lashon hara? Certainly the rest of it, about the fact that the land itself is difficult to conquer, the people are giants, all of that is something negative, something maybe untrue even. But the fact that the land is fortified, isn't that a good thing? Doesn't that show that it's, a good land, it's well fortified? Yes, it's true that it might be more difficult to conquer the land. That's certainly their intention. It's going to be difficult to do so. But that's not lashon hara about the land of Israel. Intrinsically, the land of Israel would rather seem to be a good thing. It's well fortified. It's a hard place to conquer. That seems to be a good thing about the land of Israel. Instead, what Rabbi Gershom might be suggesting is that by characterizing the land and focusing on its fortifications, perhaps what the spies are suggesting is that the land itself is negative because it needs these fortifications. It's not a land that suffices to be open, that doors can be left unlocked. It's somewhere where there are marauders, where there are armies that come by all the time, and you need to be fortified because you're always scared of the next invasion. In that reading, then, it would make sense, indeed, that that was the sin of the spies, of saying something negative about the land of Israel, something which is untrue, this need for fortification. What's really fascinating, though, about this suggestion of Rabbi Gershom is that the fact that the land itself is well fortified, that itself is not inherently negative or even inherently untrue. Rather, what Rabbi Gershom is effectively arguing is that when we talk about this sin of lashon hara more broadly, it's not just about saying untruth, but it's really about the attitude, the lens, which you look upon a certain fact. This very same fact, are the cities fortified or not fortified, could be viewed as something positive, or it could be viewed in the way the meraglim view it as something rather negative, something destructive, something critical about the land of Israel. And this really fits within Rabbi Gershom's interpretation as the primary issue of lashon hara. not solely about spreading false things, but rather about how we conceive, how we think about the things around us. Indeed, the Yisrael Meir Kagan, in his most famous work, the Chafetz Chaim, describes that in all the places in Tanakh where Lashon Hara comes up as an issue, every single time, the issue is not strictly motzi shemra, of telling false things. Rather, the issue here is about using the facts to describe something in a rather negative perspective, from a rather negative lens. The problem here is the unnecessary critical negativity, less so about the actual facts. In our world, this is only even more true. It's much more difficult nowadays to say blatant lies. There are a lot of fact checkers. You can easily Google something. It's hard to really say something that's just blatantly untrue. Much more common, and also much more pernicious, is the issue of saying something which is true, but providing a lens, a perspective, which is rather negative. And so what we need to learn from the story of the Hameraglim is not just about saying Lashon Hara, avoiding gossiping, avoiding spreading false rumors, certainly that as well, but also about the perspective we have even when sharing information to others that we should be sharing. Do we look at the world, do we look at the things around us with the glass half empty, or do we look at it with the glass half full? Do we have a more positive perspective, or are we always critical and negative, regardless of what we see and how we see it? Shabbat Shalom.